want to thank Rob Pugh for allowing us to be appearing on the WCN TV network. And I want to also thank, we just recently are able to deposit the links to our video presentations on the Strike Force of Prayer website. So I want to thank Michael Ortega for allowing that to happen. I also want to welcome anybody that would like to become a Citizen Sentinel. This is an effort, a project of the Citizen Sentinel Network. We have a newsletter. We have a network of people that are promoting candidates for office. A lot of people don't know that. It's not just an educational program. It's an activist effort. So this is one of the activist efforts, in essence, to take the teaching or education publicly into a social medium and try to expand our outreach to other people. We're looking for other people to join and become Citizen Sentinels. And, you know, if you can join and become a Citizen Sentinel, we'd hope that you could support the channel that we're putting together here, which is an initiative to more education is needed in this country. And we need to really combat the narrative type, which is not education, it's indoctrination of the leftists, of the progressive revisionist historians. So today I'm going to jump into it. I have a lot of material to cover today. Last week, what we were dealing with were some things that people didn't really understand about Columbus's journey. And you know, this was related to the concept that I was trying to portray of the issue of the concept of leaving things out of history, just, you know, ignoring these issues in history that are there, but they don't fit into the narrative of the progressive revisionist historians. And tracing that all the way back to Karl Marx, good old Karl Marx himself, left stuff out of history in his historical analyses. So what we're trying to do is reintroduce the truth into the historical record. And that in some ways is such an insane concept that you would have to do that. But here I am, and this is really what we're really trying to do. So I wanted to touch base on Columbus's journey, kind of catch people up to speed on where we were, and then go forward from there. The first shot that we have here, it's not me speaking initially here. It's Columbus, who is the guy that we're going to be focusing on. Christopher Columbus's portrait as a younger man. This is him as he was probably learning, as he was trying to sail, learning to sail from the Portuguese. So the thing that he discovered at some point while he was sailing early on is that there was probably a new world, or not necessarily in his mind a new world, but a world that he could reach by sailing to the west. And this is what he was trying to prove. I imagine he put together some kind of PowerPoint presentation, and he went to a number of different monarchs because that was where the concentration of the wealth were at that point in time. So he eventually went to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. These were the two monarchs that essentially gave him permission. These were the ones who had consolidated the 4 different kingdoms on the Iberian Peninsula and ultimately created the country of Spain. So they listened to his song and dance, and basically after some discussion about this and whether it was, you know, a real endeavor here, whether they would get any return on the investment or not, they decided that they were going to back him. Now, one of the things I introduced last time is they had to create formal decrees. They decreed that the people of Palos down in Andalusia, which was the southern part of Spain, which was the area, essentially the last Muslim stronghold there in Spain, they told these people, you have to give Columbus these ships. And so, you know, many people think, oh yeah, you know, the myth of Isabella who somehow pawned her jewels in order to, you know, send Columbus. she was one of the first monarchs he went to, and she denied him. So this mythology that creeps into history, a lot of times we have a tendency to really believe the mythology rather than the facts. We have a tendency to believe Hollywood more than we believe historians, and that's kind of a sad commentary on our culture. Anyway, one of the ships was the Santa Maria, the largest ship. He found a man who owned two smaller ships, and they were caravels. They were smaller ships. They were faster, fleeter. And the bigger ship was one owner, but he didn't provide a crew. The Nina and the Pinta belonged to the one owner, and there were these two brothers called the Pinzon brothers, who they were the captains. They had their own crews, but Columbus didn't have a crew. He had some of his relatives that would go with him, but they had to create another decree. The king and queen of Spain decreed that they would drop charges against the prisoners in the prisons there in that area if they would be willing to go with Columbus. So the overall situation is that they created a decree. The prisoners then had the choice, got out of jail free, or they would stay in jail if they were too afraid of going with Columbus. And guess what? A lot of people were too afraid to do what this crazy Italian was talking about. But by this time, I'm sorry, Spencer, I skipped that one slide there. But by this time, Columbus has stature. The people in the area, they recognize him as an important person because the king and queen are backing him. Basically, what the king and queen were doing was calling in favors from the people that owed the king and queen, or he was forcing people to do things. And the essence is that he became an important guy. And as I said in another presentation, he made a deal with the king and queen. He wanted to be called the Admiral of the Ocean Seas. He wanted to be the governor of all these islands, or the area that he would discover, the lands that he would discover. He didn't know necessarily that he was going to be bumping into these islands. But then he also made a deal for a portion of the wealth, and that was actually one of the stumbling blocks that he had at that point. The king threw him out of the palace, and he had to get back on his donkey and start, wandering down the road there. But the treasurer kind of caught him and said, look, I think we can explain this more carefully. There probably would be a good return on the investment. Treasurer didn't feel that there was a downside to this. And Queen Isabella didn't have to hawk her jewels. They didn't send much money with Columbus. They didn't actually even send troops with Columbus. I just got through explaining. They had their own crews. Columbus had to get crews from prison to go with him on his flagship. So there were no troops. But some of the times people talk about this, the progressive revisionists would probably, want people to believe that, an armed armada, the Spanish Armada came and invaded the islands of the Caribbean. But it's farthest from the truth. I doubt that the king and queen of Spain, with their, basically they had science advisors in those days, and they basically discouraged the monarchs from this investment. So it wasn't a very extravagant investment on the part of king and queen of Spain at this point. So Columbus gets what he wants, which is basically a promise. And he gets the ships, right? And he gets a crew, a skeptical kind of endeavor, because you have these prisoners, and probably in those prisons, many of them were sailors. So you have some people who could have been sailors. Now, I want you to understand, I'm going off of the journals that were translated by Bartolomé de las Casas, and then they were translated basically from the Spanish. And I'm using the records of Samuel Eliot Morison, whom we talked about last time. And if you're doing a recording of history, you really, many times in those days, you would try to put the best face on things. And here you have the history of this endeavor written either by Columbus himself in his journals, or he would, have some scribe take care of it for him. So you have to understand one thing. He had a vested interest to go back on a second journey. it wasn't just a one-shot deal. He had to be able to portray the information that he put in his journals in a very uplifting or exciting or inspiring manner. And so these are the words that came through the journal. But even in those journals, you get a lot of crazy things that are showing up. So we're going to talk a little bit about this. He left King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. He left Palos in August of 1492. The first journey across the ocean, they went down, they got some supplies in the Canary Islands, which was essentially claimed by Spain at that time. And they just basically took a latitudinal cross route across the Atlantic Ocean, pretty much straight across from Africa. So first journey, get there, basically he's in the New World, which he's thinking, this is Cathay. He was going to Cathay. And there was no other maps at that moment in time that showed that there was this whole continent between Europe and Cathay on the other side of the world. They just figured that it was all water, all ocean. And so Columbus, he is in this area in the Caribbean, which is named after one of the tribes, the Carib Indians. And I want to correct something that I said last time. I got my sides of the island mixed up. The Arawakan Indians were on the western side of the Hispaniola area, and the Taino were the ones that he first encountered on the eastern side. So the Indians, they were of the same tribe, but some of them had moved to the outer area on the eastern side of the island. And the Carib Indians were the dominant tribe of Indians in that time, in that area. And they were essentially cannibals, very ruthless. They came from the Orinoco River Valley in the northern part of South America, near Colombia. You might be able to see that on the map down there, over probably near the H, where the south is over pointing on the eastern portion of that map. The Orinoco River Valley is where these Indians came from, and archaeologists have traced the pottery that they made to that area. However, these people came out of the jungles of South America, and they used poison darts. They beheaded and disemboweled people, and I'm going to get into what happened when they encountered the Spaniards at this point. But the landing party basically went ashore in Hispaniola. They basically they were assuming that they had touched land in Asia somewhere. But when they actually met the Indians, they weren't like any people that they'd ever discovered or encountered before. Now, the interesting thing is that the King of Spain sent a couple of translators with Columbus, and the translators, they neither one of them, if they were going to India or China, it wouldn't have mattered, because I think that one translator was able to speak Arabic, and the other one was probably another form of some type of Asian language, but they wouldn't have been able to communicate. And one of the things that people miss in Columbus's journals when they're trying to talk about this history is that he lamented the fact that they didn't have anybody that could translate and speak the same language. He puts that in his journals, and it's a regret in his own mind, and as he's thinking about this at this point, as he's writing it or having it written. So Columbus, he's seeing the Indian people and encountering them, but they are not able to properly communicate. So, Spencer, you want to put up that slide with the Indians? So, in essence, I'm sorry that I skipped the one of him claiming the islands, but his encounter with these people was a little bit startling in one sense, because when he was discussing things, I mean, they had to use sign language of some kind, a makeshift sign language, and pointing and, pointing to objects and trying to, reach some kind of common understanding. When he was looking at the Indians, though, he discovered that they had scars. Many of them had scars on their bodies. Uh, and he was inquiring as to why. And so they indicated that there was other Indians in another part of the islands that they discovered that were the Caribs, and they would take them as slaves. Now, last week I was kind of, shocking people that, especially those who are totally locked into the narrative, that Indians took slaves. Well, yes, Columbus discovered it right off. It was written. It's ignored by the progressive revisionist historians. And, the other side of this is like, oh, they were all Indians, right? They were all, basically, brown skinned people. And, we lump people together like this, even within our own society, even today, don't we? So, you're thinking about another time in history, many, hundreds of years ago. So don't really be too presumptuous about the human nature when it encounters individuals. Now, the unique thing about this is that Columbus found these people he found them very friendly, very peaceful, and very giving, very loving people. It was in his journals. But the part that the progressive revisionists, they focus in on is, oh, well, I think, and he's writing this to the sovereigns, that they would be easily made into slaves, right? So they ignore one part of the narrative, but they zero in on another. And so this is an omission that is actually very important. Columbus described these people as very loving, and he was amazed at how much, in terms of, almost like childlike, innocence that they had there. And it was an amazing encounter. You're talking about two different types of human beings encountering one another there. That's not the main thing. It was focusing in on, yeah, they would make good slaves. Okay, so the overall situation, when we look at this situation, I'm going to backtrack here. He did formally claim the islands. So Spencer, you can go back to that slide. And this is a famous painting, him coming and claiming the islands. But I want to go back to that point, claiming the islands, because he, in the back of his mind, he knew that he was going to be governor of those islands, any of the islands that he could claim. And basically, why not, go for broke and do as much as you can, because you're going to have the backing of the monarchs. And these people just cleaned up the island, or the peninsula of Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, of all the Moors. So Columbus knows he's got a lot of power behind him. So he's doing these things with a foresight in mind, thinking forward, not just as a one-shot type of deal. So he's sailing around these islands, and this is where you can put that map of the Caribbean back up there. He's sailing around these islands, and he's trying to explore what's there. And it's islands. Some is, some is a larger portion of the island, an island. And one of the things that he mistakenly thought is that essentially Cuba was the island of Japan. And it was fitting of the descriptions of those people who had talked about it in journals and things. So he mistakenly thought that he was in Asia somewhere. And they had no idea, because they didn't have a map of the area at that point in time. Now, Columbus has to go back. He has to return to Spain to report and to give this indication. But one of the things is that it's coming, and this is still in 1492, it's coming on Christmas. And so, they may have been celebrating a little too much. You won't find that in the journals, but I would imagine, these are Christians and celebrating Christmas. How would sailors celebrate Christmas? Well, you can't do a whole lot, but you might have some rum or something available. Well, it turns out that they left the steering of the ship, which Columbus forbade, all across the journey, forbade a teenager steering the ship. And you know what happens when you give, the keys to the car to a teenager. Well, this teenager, this cabin boy, he might not even have been a teenager, but this cabin boy, he steered the ship onto the island. It was Hispaniola. So he steers the ship onto the island. They can't pull the ship off. I explained that a little bit in the last episode, and this is why they have to create La Navidad. La Navidad is basically the community, little huts that they put together. Now, they describe it as a fortress in Columbus's journal. He talks about it as a fortress. I want you to think about this. If you look at that ship that you're talking about, they're called the Santa Maria. It would not have made a fort in essence. When we think of even if we think about James Fort in 1607, when the English came across the ocean, James Fort would have taken quite a lot of lumber to do this. And so what they had to do is they had to take apart the ship. So this next slide is basically a slide not of Columbus, but this is a portrait of Vasco de Balboa, who was the Portuguese sailor. And one of the interesting things he did is he actually purposely put his ship on grounded land there, where he could turn it on its side and then do repairs. It's now it's called dry dock, but he could repair the under the water line of the ship at that point. But this is what Columbus did. He left the ship on the land, but they pulled it apart board by board, and they build these little huts for the people. Now, he called it a fortress probably because he's talking to the King of Spain, and these people that he has to leave there, guess what? They're the crew of his flagship. And who were those crew members? The prisoners that he pulled out of the prisons. Now, I want you to imagine just for a minute, if, say President Biden was sending an exploration to Mars, and, we were going to send some astronauts out there, but he doesn't find enough volunteers to go to Mars, because it's going to take a long time. Probably it's only a one-way street. They're not going to come back. They'd be dying there. So one of his advisors, brilliantly says, well, why don't we just open some of the prisons, up? I mean, they're opening prisons now and letting prisons out because of COVID. So we can just put them on one of those ships, right? And what happens if they meet people who are on Mars, and, these people are actually innocent, loving people? Do you think those prisoners, how they would treat the people on Mars? I want you to put that in perspective. Okay, because this is exactly what he had to do. He had to leave 38 to 40 people. It's debatable how many people. He put a list together, but there's controversy over the list, who was on the list. But most of the people on the list, I'm sure, they came out of the prisons, because that was who was on his flagship. Now, where did the rest of the crew go? They had to go back on one of the caravels. And interestingly enough, one of the Pinzon brothers, when this was all happening, he hightailed it to the other islands. He was searching the other islands for the gold, because the Indians had told them gold is just lying on the beaches. Now, I'm talking about Indians describing the shiny stuff that they were attracted to. May have been shells that they were talking about, but this Pinzon brother took the other ship, the third ship, the only ship that they had, off in search of gold. And he didn't show up until Columbus actually was sailing back across the Atlantic. The real problem is when Columbus goes back across the Atlantic, the Pinzon brother who had left him, they join up, but he's got a full ship, and he's got to leave these 40 people back there. One of those people that he put in charge was his brother-in-law. And he gave instructions. This is in his journal. Don't mess with the Indians. Don't mess with them. And why would he have to say that? Well, I want to tell you that the guy that went off looking for gold, when he came back to Spain, he had syphilis. He died of syphilis. He barely made it back. Now, this is an interesting concept here, but the problem is that you have human interaction and you have a bunch of natives running around with no clothes on. So that's very likely why Columbus put that entry into his diary. Now, when he goes back to Spain, he's giving a glowing account, and he's talking about the gold, and these people gave him gold freely. It was, you know, an innocent giving, act of giving. They knew that he was very interested in gold, and so they kept giving him gold. He was asking it about it all the time. And so this actually initiates the first gold rush that we can understand in history. I mean, there might have been others, but when Columbus is talking about this stuff in the king's court, he's explaining that there's gold everywhere. And, you know, the brother that went off, you know, there's gold just, you know, lying all over the islands, you know, on the beaches. So this was a little bit extravagant. Now, I want to put this in perspective because in reality, many people didn't believe the heck anything that he was talking about. They had no idea that, you know, that he was telling the truth. Some of them wrote about it. This guy's, you know, it's a lie. He's telling in fact, the King of Portugal called Columbus into his court. Columbus didn't want to go, but you're talking about the King of Portugal. And one of the accounts that was written by one of the, you know, people in the court said, this guy's a liar. He went and discovered New Guinea. You know, he went into, you know, the King of Portugal's, you know, areas and claimed that on behalf of Spain. So we don't look at these things from our, you know, 21st century eyeglasses, you know, our lenses, you know, we have a different perspective on these things. So what I want to do is explain that when he went back, he had to get new instructions from the king and queen. They probably originally didn't really believe that he was going to come back based on the science advisors at the time. But what this set of instructions from the king and queen are enables him to be much more of an agent of Spain. And that means that what he was promised before, they have to honor to some degree because the king made the promise, right? He's going to be called the admiral of the ocean seas. He's going to be, you know, the governor of these islands, and he's going to get a cut of the pie. Well, the king came to regret that later. Now, on the return journey, there's 17 ships with Spaniards, priests, nobles, and a force of conquistadors who are on that channel. Now, these people come back, and what do they see? They see that the men that they had left there were massacred. They were all dead. Now, did you ever study that in your history classes? Columbus's people that he left had been massacred. And these people now, 17 ships, all these people are high-level Spaniards. This is a very serious problem. We're going to talk about how this is all sorted out later. But can you imagine leaving this in history and not talking about it? I want to thank you very much for joining. I want to let you know that next week we're going to be talking we're going to be coming on Mondays. We're going to have a Monday program, so you'll see that in the details. I want to thank everybody for taking some time out of their busy schedule today, and I hope to see you again next week. I want to thank you for our sponsors, and I want to thank you for the production crew today. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great weekend. Take care.